Welcome everyone, thank you for coming this morning. My name is T.J. Recupero. I'm on the South Elementary School Building Committee. And with us from the committee, Melissa Lynch, Katie Monahan, Principal of the Wilkins School, Jake Dorr, Principal of the school, Catherine Weiss from the school committee, Joe Buckley, also from the building committee, Joyce Hussein, also on the building committee. She's the facility supervisor for the schools. Dr. Rob, of course, superintendent, is also on the building committee. The project team we've assembled has an owner's project manager. The company's called Vertex, which is formerly Compass. Some of you will be familiar with the people here, if not the name Compass, because they worked on the high school with us. Tim Bonfatti and Don Taberry, who over the past 6 or 7 years have traveled throughout the town. And likewise with DRA, the architectural firm we've hired for this. Carl Franceschi, Courtney Southwick, also on the high school building committee, or excuse me, on the high school project, and also very familiar with the town and of course the school system. So I don't want to keep everyone on a Saturday. I did want to give you all an opportunity to know who's here from the project team, in case you have any questions, and of course, right behind me, people will explain what we're going to do. Generally, what we're going to do is give you a brief overview on where we are, where we're going, the process going forward, and also ask for your vision for what you'd like to see in an elementary school in Stoughton. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Rob.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Members of the building committee, you're more than welcome to sit down. So thank you so much for coming down this afternoon. We really appreciate it. It is our first opportunity to have a community forum and really get people together and start talking about what does it mean to be in the feasibility study of an MSBA project. And so that's where we are right now, and what I wanted to do is give the community a bit of a background of how did we get here? How did we get to the feasibility study? What's been going on for the past 2 years, and really in many ways for the past 10 or 11 years? Because this started way back when the high school project started in 2011 with statements of interest given to the MSBA. So let me do a little bit of background, and then I'll turn it over to the project team to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today and some of the milestones that we have to hit with the MSBA over the next year. Thank you, that was the slide I was hoping would be up there. So we begin way back, about 20 years ago, and we had some ADA committee work done in town from 2003 to 2009, and it addressed ADA updates needed to bring all of our schools into compliance with the ADA. At that time, buildings had some level of door frame, door openers, restroom improvements needed, elevator improvements needed, countertop work done, with the exception of the south. And the reason is there was no feasible construction solution that could be found to remedy all the multi-level issues going on in this building. And as we go on the tour later, you'll see some wonderful attempts at some ramp structures, but they don't meet ADA compliance. They're too steep for current compliance. And it really turns a building like this into 6 different levels. And at the time, the decision was made that they would grandfather the school in, knowing that down the road, we'd be standing here and looking at something new or renovation. Later in 2010, the facilities master plan prioritized all the school buildings and put the high school and the south school at the top of the list. We submitted statements of interest to the MSBA at that time, and as everybody here knows, the high school took priority in terms of need at that time. And in 2014, 2015, we began the process with the high school, and as everybody knows, we opened up the beautiful new high school in the fall of 2019. Immediately after opening up the high school, we continued to submit SOIs, and we were invited in last year into a feasibility study. And so about this time last year, we created a feasibility study agreement with the MSBA, and we've been moving forward. It takes about a year to hire a project manager and to hire an architect, and so now we're at the point where we can continue into the feasibility study. Before I talk a little bit about what that feasibility study means and what it entails, I wanted to talk a little bit about how does South and Wilkins fit into the rest of our elementary schools and give the community a sense of where does this fit in. So next slide, please. So if you look at the slides, you'll see, this is awesome because I have the slides memorized, see, so I'm really looking at the back of my head, so this is great. One of these days we're going to get a prompter where I have it in front of me. Jeff, we're going to talk about that, okay, for the next one. You'll see clearly the South is the oldest school. And you'll see at that time, in the late 50s and 60s, several attempts of additions and renovations were done. And at that time, as everybody knows, in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s, our school population was growing, with the baby boomers having children at that time. And then, about 4 or 5 years ago, it leveled off, and now we're actually seeing our enrollment growing again. And so it's a real exciting time. And the one thing I wanted to address, because I have gotten 1 or 2 questions, is, you know, we recognize, many people, I think it's pretty clear, they recognize the needs for the South and the needs for the Wilkins, but they're saying to me, well, what are you doing for the rest of the schools? Because we still have the Hanson and the other 2 schools, the Gibbons and the Daw, and they're going to be around for a long, long time. They were only built in the early 70s, they're already 50 years old, and we expect to have them longer. Well, we already passed articles at special town meeting to do dual entry improvements at the Daw and the Gibbons. We have camera upgrades in all of our schools, and at the town meeting coming forward, we're going to be looking at security upgrades for all of our schools, door lock improvements in all of our schools. We have an article on the table over at the Hanson School with working with the CPC to replace the playground. So we have all of the schools in mind, and I don't want people to come away from this meeting think that we're totally focused on the South and the Wilkins. We are always looking at all of our schools and making sure that we are doing the best that we can for all the schools. The next slide, please. So what are we doing today? Today is our first opportunity to really talk to the community now that we're in the feasibility study. As part of the feasibility study agreement, we have been asked to look at 2 different possibilities. One is a replacement or renovation of just the South School with what they call a design enrollment of 225 students. Now you may say to yourself, if you're a South parent, there are 250 students here now, how can we design a school for 225? The MSBA makes a very clear distinction between a design enrollment and a capacity. So the capacity is always more than that. So if you have a design enrollment of 225, the capacity would be closer to 300. So they understand that. But what it does is it gives us some common square footages for big spaces like cafeterias and gyms and the number of classrooms that we need and the number of specialty spaces that we need, with the understanding that populations shift and go back and forth. The other component of this that we're considering as part of the project is consolidation of 5 elementary schools to 4 and building a new school with a design enrollment of 515, excuse me. 515 would allow us a capacity of close to 600. So I don't want people, again, if you add up the 2 schools, the Wilkins and the South, and we go from 5 to 4, a design enrollment of 515, because you're going to see that, doesn't mean the new school's capacity is 515. The new school's capacity is closer to 600. It would have the ability to take care of that many students. But would involve the redistricting of the entire district in order to go from 5 elementary schools to 4. And as the project team is going to talk about in a little while, there are a lot of efficiencies that come with a larger school. When you have efficiencies in terms of gas and electricity, in terms of staffing and spaces and larger spaces and so forth. So we'll be talking about that later, but I wanted to put that out there that as part of the feasibility study over the next few months, we're going to be considering all of those options. The MSBA requires us to look at all of those options, and we're putting those forward so that everybody can see those. One of the exciting ones is an opportunity to go from 5 elementary schools to 4 with a redistricting proposal that would allow us to have a larger elementary school combined. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the project team. We'll allow the project team to do their presentation, and then we'll certainly be available for tours and questions afterwards. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Carl Franceschi with DRA. Good to see you all again. Great to be back in Stoughton. We did, as was mentioned, work on the high school project. Good to see so many here this morning. One of the steps as part of the feasibility study is reviewing the existing conditions. And I think those of you who are South families or parents sort of understand perhaps the need here. It's not a tough sell to explain the existing conditions that are in need of attention. We were the firm that did the facilities assessment back in 2010 as well, so we're familiar with the building in a number of ways. But clearly, basic things like the exterior envelope of this building is not energy efficient. Really nowhere near today's standards for buildings. It would take significant upgrades: the windows, the insulation, the roof, so forth. The interior mechanical, electrical systems, sort of the infrastructure of the building. Again, significant work would be needed to bring the building up to code and up to today's standards. There are no fire protection sprinklers. The fire alarm would need to get upgraded. There are a lot of significant improvements in that regard. But also educationally too, there aren't the kind of spaces in this school that you would see in a current elementary school too, to provide the education that Stoughton would want, for its elementary students. So just from a space point of view too, the kinds and sizes of classrooms and educational spaces needs attention. So our report will summarize this as part of the first submission to the MSBA that's coming up and identify this. And then also we do I don't really want to call it an option, but we do a plan that's called a base repair to establish not only an entire list of all those deficiencies, but we put a cost against them. What would it take to bring the building up to code? What would it take to repair the windows, the roof, and so forth, so that we have a sort of construction cost number to use as a baseline in comparison when we start developing other options. Options like a renovation addition or options like a new school, so that you and all the taxpayers actually have some good information to think about when you think about value. And just to share with you some of these, if I can, if I can turn and talk at the same time, Jeff, and still pick this up. But one of the things we'd like to do, as we say, is to share with you some images of other projects, of what you have now at the South School and what it could be in a modern new elementary school. Places like this cafetorium, which is a combination of cafeteria auditorium, right? That concept still applies, but the kind of space, the kind of sound systems, lighting systems, support for music and drama programs and so forth could be significantly improved. Likewise, one of the things in schools today is trying to use every bit of space in a school so that hallways aren't just for circulation, but hallways actually provide some breakout spaces, some so-called extended learning environments too. That's possible. It's a very efficient use of space that can really change the feeling of the school. And just general kinds of classrooms too. There's a great variety of materials, finishes, spaces that are incorporated into classrooms these days. And nooks and crannies, as we say too, because we recognize that learning happens in different ways, and students have different modes of learning, and some want to be somewhat independent at times. Other times they want to be in small groups. It's not always a teacher standing at the head of the room lecturing at kids, particularly at this age. And so classrooms have different activity zones too. Gymnasiums, clearly, as we go next door and you look at the gym, it's greatly undersized. Not just for an elementary school, but if we want to think of this as a community facility too. Most, even in an elementary school, we size the gym, at least the basketball court, you might say, for adults too, so that after hours or weekends it can be used by more than just the school students. And libraries too, obviously that, even in recent schools, that's a space that's evolving as we get more information online and from computers and less from hardcover books that need rows and rows of stacks of shelves. We can have fewer reading materials, but we have more sort of related activities that can happen in a media center, sometimes called Learning Commons these days, as well. And sometimes the library is almost inverted from what we all remember a library, where you go in and be quiet. Now you go in and talk and work in small groups, and if you want to be quiet, there are small rooms off of that library for working in smaller, quieter groups. And even outdoor too, that's the thing. This is a great site in the sense that it's kind of a nicely wooded, secluded site in some aspects, and could work into the educational curriculum of the school. There are ways to do that a little more effectively than it's currently being done here. And we definitely would investigate that in a proposal. Just again, some outdoor seating areas and learning opportunities for not just play, but learning. Outdoor classrooms are often incorporated into schools these days. And with that, I'll let Dom Taveri from Vertex talk about the process.
Thank you, Carl. Good morning. Thanks, everyone, for coming. This is now, we don't have the great pictures, I apologize. But it's important to realize that just like the Stoughton High School project, we went through phases of design, of planning on this project. So right now we're in the preliminary design program, and we're working on educational program which the principals of both elementary schools are putting together, the 21st Century Educational Program, similar to what we did at Stoughton High School. That will be part of the submission that will be going to the MSBA. I want you to realize also that we are in partnership with the Mass School Building Authority, so it's important to know that this is a partnership, and we have, with their guidelines, we have a plan and a process to get through for the best possible solution for the town of Stoughton. We do in this particular phase of it, we're doing a summary. We evaluate the existing conditions, which Carl talked about. We also look at site development requirements, and we present the preliminary evaluations. In every phase of this, and there's 3 phases here, we present to the school building committee and we present to the school committee for approval as we go through prior to officially submitting our submissions. It's important to note, though, that that it's very transparent. You'll see all of this information as we go through the process. It'll be through our social media accounts, through minutes, and our presentations will have attachments. The next phase will be the preferred schematic proposal. And I think I might have mentioned that we have to submit the preliminary design phase by the end of April. And then we go in what we call preferred schematics. So we start to distill this down to what is really the possible and preferred options going forward. And that will be submitted by the end of June. And then we really get into schematic design, which will give us, as you can see, a lot of the consulting engineers for GRA will come on board. And we really get into what this project will be and what everybody will accept as far as the school committee and the town of Stoughton and the parents here. Part of what we're doing today is to get your input on what we want to have here for your kids and for the future generations here. And the important thing to note is that we have deadlines along the way. We did this through the high school project. We met all our deadlines. And then eventually we're going to get into the town vote, which will be May of 2024. So we have a long ways to go, but it comes up quickly. We are working on every other week we meet, every day we talk to each other. We get information from our principals, we get information from our operations people like Joyce Husseini here. It's constant communication, there's constant talk, and this is a process that we went through with the high school. It was very successful. We're continuing the same process going forward. This here is basically showing you a bar graph of a schedule that we have and kind of highlights of what's going on. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over. Right.
So as part of this process, we are looking at available sites in town. It's one of the parts of the MSBA process. They have a very rigorous and prescribed process that we should go through. So even though we had a fairly long list to start with, really the possible sites for this project have been winnowed down to basically a few relatively close by sites, because first of all, we are dealing with a geographic area. Whatever the project is, whether it's a renovation addition or a new school, we want it to be in the same general catchment area of the South School to serve the town well with the other schools in town. So if we look at this a little closer, let me stand aside and point with my pointer here. So site number 13 is the existing school that we're in. That's one parcel. Directly behind the school, many of you know there's an athletic field. Right now, it's sort of a sloping section. It does have a power line going through it. There's kind of a constraint, but that is another possible location that we'll look at. And then the third is number 1 here, shown in green. It actually has some frontage on Park Street. Right now, there's it's not an official street adopted by the town, but it's called a so-called paper street then, Fano Drive. And it was actually acquired by the town back in the 60s for potential school use. So the town had foresight back then to acquire some land with this in mind. So we will be studying options on each of those remaining sites here during this phase. And as Dom says, we will narrow it down to a preferred option by June. There we go. So one way to think of this process is sort of a decision tree as we move forward. As the superintendent mentioned, we are going to be studying 2 enrollments as we think about the project. And again, all of this applies whether it's a renovation addition project or a new school. Those 2 enrollments are 225 students or 515, essentially a double size, 515 students. So that is part of the decision that will be made by June as well, when we think about options. Then, as we say, we'll think about, what are the benefits and values of a addition project versus a new school. And we'll develop a list of criteria, try to be as objective as possible, unemotional, I guess you might say, and develop those criteria with you all, with this building committee and school committee as well, to help evaluate these options. It's not just, which is the lowest cost necessarily. There are a lot of other factors that many districts consider, which fits the educational plan best, which is the least disruptive to ongoing students. What about the impact to abutters? So there are numerous costs, and not just first cost of construction, but also operating costs too, going forward, for instance. So those are some of the criteria that will be employed to evaluate these various options that are ultimately developed. And then just to share with you, one of the activities that's already been going on is so-called visioning, which is a process of sort of high-level thinking about how does teaching and learning want to happen at the elementary level in Stoughton. Not just for the South School and not just for the Wilkins, but basically for all elementary schools. We do have an educational consultant on board to help facilitate that. We've had 2 workshops already. We will be having a 3rd. And these are some of the aspects that we consider in going forward. Is we want to get input from everyone. Oops. There we go. These are some of the aspects that have been discussed and have risen to the top already about that. If you can read that, this is sort of a bar chart of what were the most popular aspects, educational goals that were identified by the group. And the group is pretty diverse and large. I think we've had about 35 people there, included administrators, teachers, educational consultants, parents, and some of the topics that they thought were the most important were student-centered learning. In other words, identifying, that not all students learn the same, at the same pace, or the same methods, and the curriculum should be geared to that. Ultimately, the space should support that. Social-emotional learning, universal design for learning, those are kind of related to student-centered. Universal design means sometimes the same curriculum needs to be delivered in multiple ways so that every student ultimately can get it, and so forth. So these are good guiding principles that ultimately go into an educational plan, which becomes really a roadmap for our design team going forward. And that's one of the key parts of this first submittal that Don talked about by April. We want to have not only the existing conditions wrapped up, we want to have that educational plan, at least a preliminary draft of it, available. And then also we will be developing the first of the options. So we won't be evaluating them necessarily, but we'll be developing some of these options by April, and then we'll move forward from there to winnow it down to the preferred option in June. So what we want to mention is, and there's a QR code here too, for those that want more information or to be regularly in touch with the project. There is a project website that will be maintained with a lot of this information. You can use that QR code to connect to it, or you can come up afterwards and see the exact address there. But we also want to spend the rest of this afternoon, the time available here, probably at least the next 30 minutes or so, in smaller groups, so that we can break up into groups of 6 or 7 people. With the number of folks here, we probably anticipate having like one group in each of the corners of the room, and we'll spread ourselves, the design team, project team around too, to join with you. But we really want to just hear your feedback and on what's important to you. And the topics that we've identified are these kinds of, high-level thoughts. What are your hopes and dreams, or how would you define success for this project? What are your concerns about the process as well? What are you most excited about? Now's the time. It's early in the project. We hear everything from, oh, we'd love to have a swimming pool at the school, or a hockey rink in town, or something. We'll listen to all those. We can't necessarily satisfy them all, but that's the kind of feedback we would love to hear. And we will have more of these community meetings in the future as we have more information to share with you, but also we'll be able to respond to some of those things we hear today with, how have they been incorporated into the project, into the thinking, and so forth. So before we break up into small groups, I guess, are there any kind of general questions you think the whole group should hear? We will have an opportunity at the end of the small group session to quickly come back and just have like one person in each group report out what your group talked about, some of the highlights, just so you won't miss out by not being at that table over there if you're over here, for instance. So we will have that opportunity. But if you think there's some high-level questions that we should take now, we will do that. Otherwise, you can move around and just we'll spread ourselves out. We'll record. We'll move these boards just to remind you of some of the topics. But obviously, you're free to sort of share whatever's on your mind this afternoon. Okay. So thanks very much for that discussion. It sounded like there's a lot of meaningful input that was gathered. We would like, as we said, to share, if one person from each group could sort of give us a quick summary of what your group talked about so that nobody feels like they missed out. And just take a minute or two. And then, again, if there are any questions, we'll take them now. But after that, we intend to take a tour of the building led by Joyce, the facilities director, who knows the building really well and can answer those kind of technical questions as well. We'll all make that available to everyone. You're going to start, Courtney, with your group?
Sure. Our group had a lot of good discussion. I guess I'll start with the green. So hopes and dreams, we got some good feedback in terms of what a new school would be, a safe space for all, dedicated space for specials. We've heard a lot about shared spaces and acoustic issues between art classes and cafeteria at the same time. So having just dedicated spaces for all the educational programs and all the specials is something that that they would like to see in a new school. Other things in terms of hopes and dreams that we've seen is, there's parents here that are concerned about, they like their neighborhood schools right now. They hope that the South School gets a new school, but they don't want the Wilkins to necessarily close and get redistricted. That's the point.
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. So there were concerns about redistricting. There are parents and teachers here that are concerned about the Wilkins School closing and redistricting. I think Dr. Rabi had explained it. It's something that even could happen even if there was no consolidation as well. So, but it's good to hear that feedback from everybody. What's the next one? What is everyone most excited about? More classrooms, more space, dedicated specials, open spaces for learning, breakout spaces came up a few times, updated spaces that are more safe and conducive to learning, as well as just excited that the South School is getting a new school and provide a great learning space for the students. And then successful projects, a new modern space and a good environment that helps students learn. You know, I think a lot of these overlap in terms of the first three that we discussed. So, you know, those can be wrapped up in terms of successful projects as well. And the last one is the orange, the questions and concerns. Yes. There are concerns about having a walkable path to school right now. You know, there's some folks that move to Stoughton and they enjoy the fact that they can, you know, their kids can walk to school right now, and they're concerned if the new location, they are now going to have the bus students potentially. There are costs associated with before and after school care, those types of things. And then just closing of the Wilkins School is a concern as well. It says they're the only Title I school and most diverse school and best MCAS performance school. So that's a concern in terms of that school being closed. And you know, if there's any further concerns, we can address them after this. Dr. Rob, if you wanted to follow up on those questions.
Okay. Matt, you want to go for our group? You don't necessarily have to read every single one or anything, but just summary.
All right. So overall, there was a ton of excitement at our table regarding the new school, providing just a better learning space for all the kids, better technical infrastructure, better library facility, better access to books, and more kind of community learning type spaces would be great. There was some concerns around the redistricting, as was mentioned previously. Just because we do have a nice community school here in the South School, and you know, what would that look like? And there's just some unknowns as far as that's concerned. Obviously, some of that stuff could get ironed out. Some other exciting aspects would be, you know, building a new playground facility for the kids, more community type spaces, whether it's athletic fields or different spaces for the whole community to access would be nice. You know, perhaps better athletic facilities as far as the gym's concerned would be great. Providing a better drop-off type routine would be nice. So I think there's a lot of positives associated with the new school.
Okay, thanks, man. Someone from the back there? Thanks.
Take the long walk up. Hey all. So we had, obviously you can see the board, we had a mixture of excitement for a new building, which we are all, I think, universally excited that students are going to be able to learn in a building that's ADA compliant, a building that has new facilities, new spaces, dedicated spaces. You're not sharing spaces anymore. But I would say that there were a lot of concerns additionally within our own group. So the biggest was coming down to redistricting, the bigger impacts. How many students would be impacted by the redistricting? How many of those students would be from underprivileged, underrepresented, or minority groups? How would it impact Title I funding? So with the Wilkins being the Title I school, if you drop the percentages of students in other schools, you know, still below that 44% threshold, you know, at what point do we lose that wonderful support that's universal amongst the district and generalized for all students in the school to be able to access that specialized support? I think that's one thing the GIS study might be able to kind of tease out. What would it mean for the teachers? What would it mean for the administrators, for the support staff? If they're all moving to a single consolidated school, would we be consolidating positions? Would that be increasing caseloads for things like ABA therapists, for OT, for specialists? Are we consolidating positions, increasing their caseloads, or are we talking about having double the staff here in that position? The other thing is, when we're looking at redistricting, what is the new distance that students are going to have to travel on average? And how many of those students are coming from the Wilkins who also might be underprivileged or underrepresented, you know, and now all of a sudden they're having to take on this additional busing cost. What would the added cost of busing be in that situation, and how many students would that affect, both in terms of busing, but also after school, before school type impacts? Because if you can't have your kid walk to school, they have to do something else potentially. That could be a negative for sure. I think the last, special education as well, similar supporting staff. How much staff would be lost potentially as a result of the redistricting, the consolidation, that kind of thing. In terms of the green, the hopes and dreams, it did center on mostly the ability to build out new recreational, sporting facilities, potentially a pool, basketball courts, band space or musical spaces, theater space potentially, and also the opportunity to potentially do something that we could then rent out as a community, a pool that could then be rented out to either others in the community or other communities. The other one was, would the feasibility study include how much debt can the town afford without a negative impact on the town's current bond rating? That is a large potential pratfall for this project. In terms of excitement, I think generally we were all extremely excited that there are going to be students in town that get to benefit from a brand new school. And that's something that I think is, like I said, universally exciting. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who wouldn't support that kind of a move. But there are potential costs that we need to make sure that we are cognizant of, aware of, and that we are addressing. That's all I got.
Great, thanks.
Can I say a few words just before we go on the tour? We're going to thoughtfully take all these questions and put them together, but I do want to address some of the concerns. I was actually talking to the Lion faculty meeting about some of the stuff that you just brought up yesterday. So one of the things, remember that staffing is always driven by enrollment. So the number of teachers, specialists, special education teachers you need, OT, PT, speech therapy, and all of those are driven by enrollment. Our enrollment isn't changing. So even if when we go to a school that's design enrolled for 515, but potentially could have 600 students in it, we need all the staff we have. Right now, it's not on the table to say, oh, we're going to cut staff to consolidate. The savings in a larger school is more in the HVAC, in the heating, in the being able to have a bigger cafeteria, a bigger gym, dedicated space for art, dedicated space for music, dedicated space for special education. Remember, when many of these buildings were built, we saw the decades. Special education back in the 60s and 70s wasn't anywhere near what it is today. So we know that, and so does the MSBA. And so there will be dedicated space for special education. There'll be dedicated space. What we've had to do is take buildings that were built 40 or 50 years ago, and we've had to put in those things as they've happened over the last 20 or 30 years. Now we're building from scratch. And so building from scratch allows you to do that. And one of the great things that the MSBA has done in Massachusetts is they've standardized all of that. So they make it very clear to us, classrooms have to be a certain size. The town isn't allowed to decide to build small classrooms. You have to build classrooms a certain size. There has to be light. There has to be proper HVAC. There has to be dedicated spaces for all the specialties. So it's not on our mind right now to lessen the number of staff or change the number of staff because the enrollment isn't changing. So just remember that. And whenever you're designing a school, who you have working for you is controlled by the number of kids that are in front of you. That's not changing. So I don't see the staffing necessarily changing. I don't want people to worry about that.
Would that change with the loss of Title I?
So with Title I right now, and I do want to dig into that question because it's a great question, and I want to be a little bit more prepared to give a thoughtful answer, because I'm not so sure that we would lose Title I services. We just have to see how that works out with the percentages. The one thing I do know is that while the Wilkins certainly does have a diverse population, that diversity is also spreading all around Stoughton. And I know some of the other schools are also seeing an increase in the number of diversity in their schools, and those decisions would also be 4 or 5 years from now to see exactly where those are. So we have to reevaluate that. I don't see Stoughton losing or having any less Title I money available to it. Exactly where it would apportion, that's what we'd have to think about. So I don't want to over-answer that, but I was listening very close to that question. So I just wanted to address some of those concerns. And the other thing that came up, and I know everybody wants to go on the tour with Joyce, so I promise I'm going to let you go in 2 seconds, is we do see that there are enrollment bulges in all of the schools. And so we are facing a situation where in a couple of years we'd have to redistrict anyway. We'd have to move people around anyway. Because right now, they're just, as people are moving into town, what was decided however many years ago the current districts were decided is beginning to show that it needs to be adjusted. So doing it 4 years from now, 5 years from now, would make sense. If we weren't in this position, we'd probably have to do it anyway. So I just want to just put that out there.
So just as a quick follow-up.
Sure.
And I appreciate the thoughtful response. With overcrowding schools already, with potential for redistricting anyways, why not build a larger school without closing a school? So in other words, why can't we prepare for this additional population without the need to necessarily shutter a school that has capacity of over 300?
Sure. I think with the Wilkins, it's really about repurposing it and what we might be able to do with it too, because our preschool is also bulging, and we have many more kids coming into our preschool program. And so we're really looking down the road at what ways we can repurpose the Wilkins School and what might be some other opportunities. A school of 600 with the other 3 would allow us to maintain the enrollment of 1,800, 1,900 K to 5 students that we have. And what the new school of 500 or 600 would do is, in a redistricting plan, it would also lower the population of the other 3 schools as well. And so that would allow us to kind of redistribute the students as well. And I think that will help some of the enrollment increases we've seen, particularly at the Daw and at the Gibbons. So just to put it out there, and we'll be talking more and more about it.
But given the numbers, either design enrollment of 225 or design enrollment of 515, would it actually ease the burden at other schools? Because I feel like what you're doing is you're taking 2 schools that already have design enrollments in that neck of the woods, combining them into one that has a design enrollment that is effectively simply the 2 added together.
We know the capacity can be up to 600 in a design enrollment of 515, so it should help. That's what we've been thinking about.
Okay.
But again, I want to keep talking, and I want to really be able to gather everybody's questions. But I just wanted to address some of those in this meeting so that people know that we're absolutely thinking about all of this.
Why made the choice to Wilkins to be a school?
Because the Wilkins is also having a lot of the same structural issues as this school. They're not as severe, but they're certainly having the same issues. Joyce, can you give us just a couple of issues?
And when Mr. Fitzgerald and I were on the Facility Master Plan Committee, we were tasked twice, once back in 2010 and once after 2017, to rate the schools in the priority order of reemplacement based just purely on their physical condition. So the Wilkins is a steam plant school. The Wilkins and the Jones are more expensive to heat overall. Each school is more expensive to heat than the high school is. So there's just such an inefficiency in terms of the utilities. The Wilkins has had some recent upgrades, the windows and the roof and stuff that still make it a viable place to use other services, but not necessarily places where there are a couple hundred kids in the building, for 180 days. We did rank the South as the #1 school to replace, elementary, so the middle school falls in here too soon. And then the Wilkins is the next one, just based purely on their physical deficiencies. The leakiness of the bricks, let alone the roof at this building, like I said, steam plant is probably the biggest issue. And there's some Wilkins staff here, we can't regulate the heat. You can't take a steam system that goes for that distance and not have rooms that are boiling hot and rooms that are ice cold at the other end. And you can't rip a steam system out and put in a hot water circulation system without taking all the pipes out of the wall. So it's just not efficient to fix what's broken.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if we didn't include the Wilkins, we'd be in a position 5 or 7 years from now where it would make it even more expensive to fix. So this consolidated or redistricting approach, we're going from 5 elementary schools to 4, it not only will allow us to redistrict and solve some of the enrollment issues in the other schools, but it also is more cost efficient 20 years from now for Stoughton to make sure that we're being cost efficient in how we use our elementary schools moving forward and knowing kind of what's next on the list for repairs and needed. But thank you. these questions have been great for me and for the team, because now we can go back and really understand what's on everybody's minds. And that's why we're having these community forums, because we want to be able to address all of the concerns. So
Would you like me just to touch on it? Well, I'm sure that everybody wants to go on or needs to go on the tour, but if there's a larger group that I could speak to at once, I'd be happy to just kind of give an overview while we're in this room, because this is a great example of some of the reasons that this building has seen its useful life. So that's
sure,
how we can proceed. Okay.
I was about to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I took it. Let me go where the mic, because I have a dry throat and I'm not going to be able to see y'all. Okay, well, I can hear me. First of all, I just want to point out in this room, as beautiful as these large expanses of glass are, or plexiglass in the case, they are, in fact, single pane glass. If you're in here on a windy day, you feel the glass move, and you certainly feel the wind coming through it. It's a beautiful mid-century modern kind of feel with a couple of places where you have large expanses of glass, and they're just really inefficient. One of the biggest problems with this building is when it was originally built, pretty much this was the end of the building, and what you see behind us didn't exist. That is at the bottom of a slope. And then they put a building in at the bottom of the slope where all the water runs to. This building has got essentially 6 levels, 5 that are used by students and staff. So it's a single-story, 5-level building. And from the lowest point in the building to the highest floor elevation, it's 12 feet. So you've got quite a distance. And the hill goes on beyond that. So we have a huge drainage problem here that has percolated under the floors on the low wing, has caused flooring to raise. As a matter of fact, it's probably the only place in the building where we've got vinyl tile that's replaced the asbestos tile, which is all that you see here today is the 9-inch square tiles. So these are the kinds of things that are just hugely expensive when you have to remediate and try to remodel. And they're things that we would like to see built. They're also hugely expensive to maintain compared to new materials. The ADA ramps that are out there, and I hesitate to call them ADA ramps, were original to the building. And in many ways, it was a great foresight for the builder or the architect to design a building with ramps 32 years before ADA was law. But they are, in fact, all over 20% slope, when the maximum slope for a wheelchair ramp is 8.3, 1 inch on 12. If you try to make this pass here, where there's 2 ramps, to compliant to code, it would actually stretch beyond the doorways that you're coming into. So it's not even possible. Those are all things that kind of played into why the ADA committee looked at this, and the architect that was working with them and said, there's no structure that you can, there's nothing you can do here to fix this other than build a big structure in the center that serves with more shallow ramps to reach all these places, kind of a big octopus arrangement. But then it was going to cut into rooms that were here, and you were going to lose that without having to build on. And at the time, the decision was that it was just prohibitively expensive and probably cheaper to build. But that was, like I said, around 2000 when the ADA was doing its work. That's kind of it. I mean, from this, I can take you and show you a couple examples of some of the rooms. Multi-purpose, this space behind us with a gray rug is in fact art once a week. And they do happen to be in there, I think. Jake, you're here, at the same time that lunch is starting in some cases. And then the rest of the art classes share the space with the gym. 2 days a week it's art, 3 days a week it's gym. So we've already gotten to that point where we're not just taking classrooms and dividing them up, and we have examples of that, but we're actually kind of flowing over into these common spaces just to do academic support. With that, I'm happy to take people out and show you a couple of places, the gym, the library, some of the challenges we have, and thank you.